Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, whatever it is, wherever you are. This is Steve Holzer with BIM Object. Time today for another round of chats. And actually, we want to make it that. Welcome. I got with me today my colleague, co-host, Matthew Jackson Scarnstead. Matthew, are you able to wave to the crowd, wave to the masses?
Good morning, good evening, everybody. I hope everybody's well on this beautiful August day here where I'm sitting.
Yes, and as I sit in the broadcast capital of the world at Burbank, California, it's still, let's say, a little dark, but the sun will soon rise, no doubt, but yet summer. So while we're waiting on the rest of the folks to file into the room here, got a couple of housekeeping things. We'll get started here momentarily. So during today's discussion, Matthew is going to be monitoring pretty close this chat pane and question panels. Off on the right-hand side of your screen, you should have those where, if you would, as things come up in your mind that you think are relevant or not, even if they're not, just pop into your head, put them in there. Let us know what your thoughts are, and Matthew's going to throw the anchor out and just let me know that, hey, Steve, this we have something here that's relevant, and what do you think about that? So any questions that you might have that either maybe they're not relevant, that's fine. Still put them in there. We love to hear, what's going on in your world and be able to address them. It helps us keep this stuff relevant. But anything we don't have time to answer during our time online, it'll get answered afterwards and directly to you. A lot of times there might be questions that folks have that are kind of specific just to them, and as opposed to a larger audience. So also let you know that this learning discussion is going to be recorded. As with every one of our BIM Object webinars, they are always recorded, and whether you are able to attend the actual live webinar or not, if you register, you will get a link within a couple of days to the webinar recording. So always go ahead and sign up, register. I get a lot of questions about this each time we send out an invite. Hey, Steve, I can't make this. Will there be recording? The answer is yes. And it's always available a couple of days after the fact. In an email, you'll get a link to it. So even if you don't attend, or if you do attend, feel free to distribute it out to your colleagues and friends that you believe would be relevant. So we have a poll that helps us understand who we have in the audience. Let me go ahead and I will launch that poll. Just to give us a good idea of really what's your role. Are you an architect, designing, engineer, that end of the building where you're working with it before we even know what the building's going to be, or are you a building product manufacturer? Are you in the assembly stage with or in a VDC or a GC, or even into quantity surveying, or are you more in the facility operations and maintenance side? We're getting a lot of folks that are stepping in because it's the digitalization, which is a lot of what today is about, as well as facility owners. So have a poll in progress. Looks like we got pretty good.
It's 50%. So if you
Excellent. Yeah. I'll close the poll and share it real quick here. So as we've seen this trend shift a little bit, we do have 60% of you are architects and designers, and this is great. A good percentage of building product manufacturers, and today's talk especially really might be something kind of new and help you understand maybe a wider segment of your go-to-market strategy down the road. And we continue to grow the rest of the construction, the trade, assembly folks, and facility owner and managers. That's great, because this is a team sport. This whole concept of the built environment, it's really the knowledge, and as you're going to see in today's talk, it's bridging a lot more than just what it had historically of AEC. So, Steve, why no camera today? A lot of times, as folks they enjoy my live camera. The challenge is I got a broken wing, guys. I had some surgery last week, and that's what I look like. So, I'm actually doing all this as a one-armed one arm tied in front of my back, as the term goes. So anyway, that's why the no camera today. It was a little more of a challenge than I needed. So anyway. What is TCO? Let's get it started. Let's get it kicked off. What is TCO? Well, TCO, it's an acronym. We love acronyms in this industry. It's insane. Everything is an acronym. TCO stands for total cost of ownership. And then we're also going to answer, why does it matter? And then, as usual, I need to have the technical definition. And TCO can apply. Most of my talk today is how it's being applied within the built environment, within the building industry. TCO has been used a long time in other industries and other segments even of our industry, heavily in asset management, which is like equipment in hospitals and in schools and even factories, industrial. So often it's used by the facility managers and owners, and has been historically in their asset management systems. But it's also used in manufacturing, within a specific piece of equipment a lot of times. But we're going to talk today about how does it apply, how is it looked at to being leveraged within the building industry. So total cost ownership, it's a financial estimate that helps buyers and owners determine direct and indirect costs of a product or system. And when we say buyers, again, in our context, buyers are a lot of times procurement agents, whether they be for a quantity surveyor for a building company, or within facility management, buyers that are procuring various, let's call them disposables and expendables in terms of products needed to continue to maintain and operate a facility or a building. Historically, especially in the AEC industry, piece of the industry, way back, a lot of times it was just looked at a cost, or sometimes it's called first-time cost. What does that product cost me? What does that window cost me? What do those hinges cost? And we saw in 20 years ago even, there was a term going around for a while called total cost. And I saw this as a buyer myself. We began looking at what was the total cost, which was not just the cost of buying that specific product, but also maybe the adhesives that had to go along with it, and how do they compare in terms of maybe a floor covering with another type of floor covering system. So that became what we call total cost, which again, we're not yet to total cost of ownership. Total cost of ownership brings into account, that was the tip of the iceberg, no pun intended, as you can see on the screen. It brings into account the actual commissioning cost. What does it cost to commission this? It brings into account the operations aspects of those items, utility and energy expenses, maintenance, ongoing, whether it's scheduled maintenance or repairs, these types of things that happen, in something, and again, for the life of, and these are looked at in different ways. You'll see more in this a little bit later on, where these different line items can be looked at in different terms throughout the life. Some items, some of those products that are purchased in the old way of looking at it, maybe eventually got replaced in the life of the building. An HVAC system, maybe an air handler would get, on a 40 or 50-year life cycle of a facility, of a building, of a warehouse, that air handler might need to be replaced at 20 years. And that varies with all different types of products. But so it's the combination of all these that bring us TCO, total cost of ownership. So what this really boils down to, and why this is so important, is the dollars. I mean, so the real dollar expenditure over a facility is over that lifetime. And arguably there's different studies that calculate it different ways. I've seen it go anywhere from a minimum of 65 to 70% of the facility cost in the life of a facility, and a lot of this has to do with the lifetime value. Is it 5 years? Retail, a lot of it is just maybe 5 years. You get up into institutional and maybe universities, they might have 100-year life cycle. So, but anyway, 65 to 90% of the total cost of that facility or that system may happen after that initial AEC phase, which is why we use AECO a lot. This graphic we've been using in the Steve Holzer Talks series, the BIM Object Talks series with Steve Holzer. And I bring it back because, again, these costs from all these phases are considered in TCO, from, in the designing and engineering, the actual product purchase, site logistics, material handling, the actual installation, commissioning and startup, as a lot of these we just talked about, operation, could be energy, custodial, grounds, and these all vary from a facility management perspective based on the use of the facility. But maintenance, repairs, and then even removal and disposal, less any reclamation value. So this really, the formula for total cost of ownership, you're going to see varying formula for this, but largely it's capturing all the pieces throughout the full building life cycle of any specific piece. And there's a couple other ways to look at it. TCO it's set up to be evaluated relative to different, maybe just products. And when we say a product, so maybe we look at the total cost of ownership for just a tap or a faucet, or a furnishing, chairs, tables, a hospital bed, surgical lighting, any air handlers, pumps, all of these types of specific products individually. Most of the TCO is designed to be rolled up into system levels. So it may be viewed as the total cost of ownership for a specific type of mechanical system, electrical system, plumbing, fire protection system, maybe it's a curtain wall system, a floor system, a roof system. There was one of our, and this is the first time I did this, we asked some preemptive questions for those of you that registered, like, what are you curious about? You maybe heard the term. One of them was specifically to floors and roofs, and I'll answer that in the end, how this applies to the total cost of ownership. Another roll-up, if you will, another way that can be evaluated is at a building level. And you'll hear a little bit more about this. I've been involved for about 1.5 years with a new standards body, which is always interesting to be involved because of the number of different folks involved. But this body is in effect the American Physical Plant Association. It's a trade association of facility managers that manage 1,200 university campuses and all the buildings all over, primarily North America, but they're international as well. So anyway, they look at rolling this up at a building level, for what's a dorm housing, a student housing facility. It may have a different total cost of ownership and different systems put together to create that. It could be retail stores. A lot of times these are looked at across a serial owner. He might be looking to see why a particular warehouse in a particular location with particular various of the systems and products might have a better total cost of ownership than another. And there could be a lot of reasons for that. But so again, buildings, these are all about comparing and analysis. Campus of facilities. And when I say campus, that may be a learning institution. It may also be an industrial campus or materials distribution. Maybe it's a resort, hotels. These owners are all, again, many times or most of the time serial owners. Education, as I mentioned, retail, office parks can be all ways that TCO is evaluated. Each of these steps is a more holistic approach. But often the purchase decision is made at the product level. The farther you go up in the size, to the campuses and so forth, the more comparative it is in terms of generalities. Are we winning or losing compared to our other locations? So what does TCO have to do with BIM? At BIM Object here, obviously one of our primary core offering is content, digital content, building product manufacturers real content and getting it to this community that is involved in this complete building life cycle to use. It's very important that it gets leveraged. So BIM, as most of you on this call probably already know, it is a repository of comprehensive life cycle data, information about the facility or infrastructure. So the data is not just the visualization, not just being able to look at it, not just nowadays using augmented reality, virtual reality to understand what we're seeing and what we're looking at, but it's the performance data potentially, and energy utilization. The IoT even lays on top of this. TCO cost data, it can be incorporated into this model at all phases. So what we're seeing now, especially out of this one standards body that is getting ready to launch, is that the whole community of the built environment is being brought together to look at and just make a decision with different pieces of information from each phase. So all of this operation and maintenance as a building maybe is 2 years old has been collected, and before they replace a specific, maybe a failed system, they're going to look at that total cost of ownership so far, make a determination if there's a different products or suite of products that they could purchase as they replace that going forward. That's just a simple example. The key here is it requires no additional effort. I know already when I put this in, I said, Steve, you're going to get a lot of challenge mail. I won't say hate mail. You're going to get a lot of challenge mail that it requires no additional effort. It really does require no additional effort, but what it does require is that certain efforts occur at a more optimum point in the life cycle. Right now, often a lot of this information is not available until much later. There's many times there's just placeholders put in. I'm even going to call it late planning stages. They still have just placeholder content without knowing or begin to evaluating a complete set of products and a system for a specific facility. So as I mentioned, I was part of this standards body that was actually composed of, I think, 24 people, and I was one of 4 subject matter experts out of the industry. The rest of them were all facility managers that were managing on an average, as we sat around the table and were on our calls monthly, these guys, these gals are all managing an average of over $1 billion each. And we're talking about managing facilities such as the University of Notre Dame, and not just managing student housing, not just managing classrooms and science labs, but managing grounds, managing the University of Notre Dame's football stadium. Same with Purdue University. These Purdue University, the actual facility manager was part of the team. You can find out more about it, and I'll give you the links to that later on. But this group, one question was posed to me, and I asked him if I could use it. I've talked about this on a number of my other webinars without giving any credit to specifically where it came from, but we're in a face-to-face meeting in Washington, D.C., working on this proposed ANSI standards, and I had just shared some information about digital content and the value available. And Cameron Christensen looked at me and said, Steve, how do we destroy the apparent 7-foot thick, or that's over 2 meters, of steel reinforced lead line concrete wall that exists between AEC and O&M? And Cameron is the Associate Vice President of Facilities at the Juilliard School in New York. And I said, Cameron, this is what I imagine you're visualizing, huh? There's this wall, and in this wall we have the AEC, we have the design phases, engineering and construction, all this assembly phase on one side of the wall. And what you're saying is that there's a wall that separates it from the operations and maintenance world. And so that's why I decided to use this wall, and because his concern or his question or what he's posing to me, that challenge is as old as the wall you see in the picture. It's always been the case in our industry. There's a chasm there. Who could make this happen, Steve, this TCO, and how? And I said, Cameron, you are the owners. The owners can compel it to happen. They're the largest stakeholder. And part of this is with the shift that we've seen going away from design bid, build, or design build even to various IPD, integrated project delivery, or virtual design and construction, whatever you want to call it. The changes, it has become more of a collaborative, and it has to be driven by the owner. The owner stands the most to gain. How? How's that done? And again, I know this is oversimplifying it, but I said, Christian, you do this in your request for proposal. When you decide that you need to have a renovation done on that music hall, or a renovation done, or a new student housing structure put in place, the way that you write your RFP, your request for proposal, and what you include in it can give you what you need on the outcome. You're able to dictate. Now, I know there's a lot of contract law globally that still isn't optimum for this, and I see and believe without a doubt we're going to see this changing very, very quickly. We've been talking about it for years. It's moving beyond talk. We're seeing this happen now in some of the ways that the organizations are working together. If you're on my webinar last time, I invite you to go back and relook at that on 3 monstrous examples I was using for more of a collaborative effort. But in the request for proposal, using TCO data, it recognizes the building owner as the primary stakeholder and beneficiary in any phase of facility. Oftentimes, in the purchasing or the tendering phase, in a design bid build, the primary beneficiary of that decision of what products we're going to buy and use is the contractor, or the primary beneficiary in an early design development often of the products that are going to be used are the architect in succeeding in creating a design that meets the building requirements and the budget. But when we're using TCO data to make decisions on products, the building owner, they're really the person or the entity that is going to benefit from this, and they're the ones that have been the most in the dark or not part of this process. So with these new ways of delivering projects, we're seeing different behaviors happen, and total cost of ownership is one of those in using to evaluate what products maybe are selected or chosen or used. So TCO, it bridges the information chasm, which really is another way of looking at that barrier, that wall that existed between the AEC and O&M. It is the bridge, but it's a data bridge. It's constructed of digital building product content. And this series, I've talked about this all along as we started it off at the beginning of July, that digital building product content is the currency of the 21st century built environment. It's the one common thread, common denominator that remains constant through this whole building life cycle, which can be anywhere from 5 years to 105 years. Digital content. Asset and risk management are also, we don't see it in the former, what we call building industry or AEC portions, but this is a huge exposure and a huge management expense for these building owners. And these even asset and risk management we're seeing in a total cost of ownership when that tool is being used, that these are having big impacts on the products that are selected and purchased in through that data bridge. So really, this digital building product content it's the DNA of the data. That's really the fingerprint, and that's really the value in so much of this content, this central data environment that we've talked about in my other slides or other sessions. So I've mentioned a little bit about this, the APPA, the American Physical Plant Association. It is a trade association. They're developing a total cost of ownership standard. It is an ANSI standard, American National Standards Institute, but I'm going to submit to you that I think it's on another bullet point in a minute here that part of this ties in. I see a lot of parallels to what the United Kingdom, the UK did when they mandated that by April of 2016, BIM level 2 would be required. While that was not mandating any BIM requirements on the industry in other parts of the world legally, other than just the UK, effectively, since building product manufacturers and other players were multinational organizations, they effectively had to adopt the methods, the standards to get to that. And I think that we're going to see that with this type of a standard. I don't see this as a global standard necessarily, and that's discussing standards is another complete dialogue that we could have. I don't know that there's any silver bullet that any one standard is ever going to solve everything. I don't believe that for a minute, but many of them do impact and mold methods and processes when they're put into place and they're adapted or used as models for even other localized entities, country by country. So this particular one, it is just went out for public review as part of this consensus-based standard just this week, actually yesterday or Monday, and it is available for public review globally. You're able to access it. If you want more information about the work group that put it together, there's a link there. You can also contact Billy Zidek, is administrator at the APPA. She's happy to share with you any information anyone has about that. I think this will give you good insight whether it's ever going to affect you or not in what you do. I think it's going to give the industry good insight into a model standard for how this information, this total cost of ownership information within the built environment is going to be leveraged. So why does this matter to us today? What do we care? That's all after the fact, isn't it? I mean, when I say we, I'm talking about the smaller collective, the AE, what used to be the AEC, and most of you know in my discussions, it's no longer AEC industry, it's AECO and M. Why does it matter? Data is what makes the decision. My question to you that are on the webinar today, especially the building product manufacturers, are you providing the necessary data in your role within that building life cycle? So, you've all seen my graphic a number of times here where we have that full building life cycle in the primary stages or functions, and there's literally an infinite number of those exact same graphics in different flavors, different colors, different words, but essentially it's capturing that full building life cycle. Are you providing the necessary data in your role, whether it's a designer, an engineer? You're all embellishing and contributing data to that data store throughout that. Product purchase decisions are being made in a newly informed manner. There's a whole new way. I will say that one of the questions that came up in this particular trade association, they also have for many years had another data store of information called the Facility Performance Index. So they were actually looking at what it costs to just even run buildings. So they have a lot of that energy already, that energy utilization, a lot of those the custodial costs, the reclamation costs already figured out that they're marrying with the TCO to make it a more robust number. This is a key influence on the purchasing decision. It's impacted beyond the design and assembly phases. Back to our iceberg, a lot of times those influences were made strictly in what got specified, or that purchase decision at the construction phase. That's all being impacted very, very effectively with information that's being not just collected, but generated outside of that portion of the life cycle. As I mentioned, just as the UK mandate of 2016 impacted BIM globally, I think this TCO standard will impact product purchase decisions in the earliest design stages of the facility life cycle. I think we're going to see, and I've already seen, and Matthew, even my colleague on here, in his experience with some of the larger VDCs around the world, we have seen what we call the serial owners, the people that have multiple stores, the Ecas of the world, or even like the Starbucks of the world, or other chain owners of not just retail, but maybe restaurant or hotels. They're really able to see this quickly, and they're the ones that are driving a lot of this change that's happening. I mentioned earlier, I asked questions when you registered, and there were some great ones that came in. A few of them that you asked that I really can answer now, and how they applied. Anthony Stanton said his first general concern was with material takeoffs from a digital model is taking into account the fall off of material. Great question, and this is one of those bridge questions. The ways that material is being leveraged and utilized in a TCO environment, it may not be as much in this material takeoff in the later stages of the life cycle, but certainly in the material handling aspects and all these. In the past, we said, in this material, we just automatically add 12% for waste. These are going to be old ways of looking at things, and they already are becoming that way very quickly in various pieces of even software, but through this digital content, with materials being in a digital format, they're able to be optimized location-wise, sheet size optimized for cuts coming off and things like that. So it's no longer going to be just more general, it takes X number. It's an actual takeoff that's going to happen, because it is a total environment. Jan Basha-Norain asked, explain how to manage limited project budgets set by clients. Nowadays, it has become the norm of the clients. And when I hear you say limited project budget, I'm not real sure of the context there, because there can be a couple, but if it's in the design budget, if it's in the actual construction budget, one of the things that's going to change is back to where I mentioned that not much is being done different. It's being done at a different time. By having a total cost of ownership methodology, an owner is going to see the benefits and how that can be applied, and understand that they maybe need to allocate additional dollars and or resources to some of the earlier design stages where they're doing quantification, where it's really becoming much more of a defined science as opposed to budget. These limited project budgets, the end result for the client is they end up paying less money over the life of that facility by being smarter about how they make decisions much earlier in the process. So another one that James Maxted asked, how would a functional, in this case a coating, surfaces on facades and roofs impact TCO? So he's talking about, like if they're self-cleaning, the thermal control, the high durability. This is a great question, and this really hits at the heart of TCO. In a total cost of ownership environment, especially historically, and I think we're going to see there's already indexes out there that we're seeing that people are able to use if they've never actually built this type of building before, for cost management. it is going to have that data through virtualizations often on this thermal control and durability. You know, we can see aging studies done in virtualizations now with software where they're, again, using the actual building product manufacturer's digital content for a roof membrane system and a certain roofing insulation system and the finish on that roof system, and then maybe imposing a flame spread or an energy utilization with that building, with that system sitting at a certain geophysical location, and doing a sun study over seasons to see how that impacts those different roof membranes or roof insulation membrane build-up systems, impacts their total cost on the life of that proposed facility. So that's how we're seeing those impact TCO.
Can I interject here, Steve, if that's okay?
Matthew, yes, absolutely.
Well, I haven't spoken like I've been sitting here silently the whole time. So on those two questions by Jan and James, they actually have a real common space. So a lot of the work that I do here, basically in Europe, is that a lot of the feedback that we get back from our clients, the building product manufacturers, is that basically the way that things are being prescribed, it's a race to the bottom. That is a race to the bottom of how much a material costs. And you would say that's very true in many parts of our lives. What TCO does, especially talking about functional coatings and talking about project budget, is that the clients set a function that they want their building to achieve, and then a budget kind of appears out of it. Basically, they want to build what they can for that amount of money, and then a team goes out and basically it's a race to the bottom to get the minimum amount of cost. What TCO does is as Steve did with his excellent slide with the Great Wall of China, is that if you actually get the O&M team to speak to the design team, and the design team turns to the client and goes, hey, if you get this functional coating for a facade, it's going to cost you twice as much. But the increased insulation of the building and the reduced maintenance will cost you 70% less over a 50-year life. You will spend less money. And that is exactly what the clients are asking. Smart clients, and there are not many. I'd say this is the not even early adopters stage yet. This is the stage before where people were thinking about the lighthouse companies. This is what they're thinking about now is, okay, if I spend more here, but I will save more here, that is how things will move too. So the whole race to the bottom kind of is going to start moving itself, which is a fantastic kind of opportunity for building product manufacturers who have been trying to make stuff as cheap as possible, now have to make things, hopefully, which will be most economical as possible and as sustainable as possible. And so those two questions are very closely related. So Steve, do you want to jump in there at that point?
No, thank you, Matthew. Thank you for jumping in. You make excellent points, and yeah, that'd been great for you to come in at any point in time here on these, because you're also seeing a lot of this, and I really appreciate what you just pointed out. It kind of drags that information back over the wall, and really adds value to the complete process, which is what's benefiting the owner. And I agree with you. This is not the vast majority or even the norm yet. I submit to you it will be, and it's becoming much more quickly because of many of the middle managers today in this industry have never lived without the internet. So they actually think, breathe, look, view all this very differently than even 5 or 10 years ago. And part of that is data. They're thinking in terms of the data. So while Matthew, I do agree with you, it is a small segment. That same segment are the ones that actually kind of set the tone and will show, because they have the ability, if you will, the research and development budgets, because they are managing such large swaths of facilities. The rest of the industry that maybe has smaller segments are going to be able to capitalize on what they've learned and found. So one other one that I thought was really a great question, Gert Stridham answered or asked, is it possible to do a cost comparison between different suppliers of the same product, including procurement time? I think the answer is yes. I think there's going to be some fences thrown up when it gets to various trade agreements and so forth. At the same time, the data will be there for a quantity surveyor to leverage and to do that cost comparison. Back to my initial, or to the iceberg slide, I said, we used to look at just the cost of door hinges. Then we began looking at, well, these particular door hinges took, an additional, I mean, this is a bad example, an additional man hour versus door hinge B to install, or maybe it's even a tap, or a fixture. Those were easy to see. I think with total cost of ownership, it's going to give the ability, the data to compare those costs, as Matthew even just pointed out, between even surfaces and facades. You're going to be able to get some real tangible information and make a purchasing decision on systems to use, maybe, or products. So I believe this is the last one. Pradeep Gumar asked if we had any data and figures on TCO for architectural exposed concrete instead of use of claddings for commercial buildings. No, the answer, I don't, and whether it's available today or not, it may be. As Matthew just pointed out, this is a fairly specific item. So I think we're going to see these kinds of figures become available out of practices such as understanding the total cost of ownership going forward, so that in the design phase, these, and actually I'll refer back again to the webinar from 2 weeks ago, where I shared how some design teams were looking at various facades for a very, very large new American football stadium, using completely different systems for this new arena in the early design phases, which would have been the cladding for those buildings. So I don't have data and figures for this specific comparison, but this is kinds of things that are going to be available and are being made because there's total cost of ownership data gathered now.
That actually, so going to jump in here, Steve. That actually brings us on quite nicely to a question that we've had from David Sanchez. It does actually follow on. David asks, do you have a TCO data standard in BIM object? And I think that actually meets quite nicely with the question just asked about a very specific item. The interesting thing with total cost of ownership, at least how we see it moving forward today, and of course it's in its infancy, there is a long way for it to go, is there will be no standard or standard way of measuring it, because it kind of depends on your local resource. I mean, the electricity cost in your local area will be very specific. The labor cost of maintenance will be very specific. The insurance cost, all these sorts of things actually make up TCO. So usually to calculate a total cost of ownership for building, they have to be applied on a local level rather than a much broader one, because of course we all have different costs depending on where we are in the world. The interesting thing though, what BIM object is actually kind of responsible for and is really interested in, is that we have to make sure as an organization that the data is available for the organizations when they need it. And that is our day-to-day work, is working with the building product manufacturers to make data available, not just to the 60% of our attendees here, which are the architects and the designers, but also to make the data available once that building has been built, to make that data available to go into whatever system they are using to calculate TCO. And there are many, many systems, or it could just be plain old Excel. So our job at BIM Object is just to make sure that we bring and present the data available and standardize it in a way for the industry. Will there be a TCO data standard? There's standard ways of measuring sustainability through carbon wastage. You have it in Europe. I don't think you have it in the US, the EPD system,
EPA.
Steve. Yeah, you have a slightly different system in the US to Europe. I don't know. I know they also use the EPD system in the Middle East. So there's a standard way of measuring carbon, but it's still, how much a kilowatt hour of electricity is totally specific on your agreement with whichever electricity supply you have. There might be a standard formula, maybe. So we'll see what comes out.
Matthew, that's a great point. And I will say that as I was preparing this, I chatted with Deke Smith. Deke was the executive director of the Building Smart Alliance, who developed the U.S. National BIM standard that I was part of a number of years ago. And Deke had another presentation that he shared with me, some of this data on, some of the stuff that I've shared in here, with the UK, and he had worked together with the UK and the US, the EPA even, on some of these TCO items. It was kind of a laundry list, what was looked at in each of the countries. And carbon was the one common one that they were both measuring. That was one of the only ones. I think there were 4 or 5 items that the UK was measuring, and 4 or 5 that the US had, but carbon was one that was actually identical across both agencies. And again, those are just 2 countries. I get that in the world, but I think what we see is, as is the UK did with adopting BIM, that success kind of becomes the de facto standard, if you will. How they go about it. Everybody else, it might be slightly different. It might be called a different name in the standard. It might be adopted as a different standard by a different company or country, but often the meat of what's happening is very, very similar. And that's what, as Matthew just pointed out, BIMobject, we deal with this as a global company day in and day out. And Matthew, as he pointed out also, he's even part of a lot of our back end of how we manage that data. So Matthew, were there other questions or discussion items that came in that we maybe need to share with the larger audience that we have?
No, nothing else has come in yet. Of course, if you're watching at home, of course that you can send us follow-up questions if you're watching this on recording. But I think we've gone through pretty much everything on the Q&A list.
Good. So everybody, I do get this question: how do we get invites? Well, for sure, the easiest way to get an invite is this goes out to our larger user community at BIMobject. So if you register as a user at BIMobject.com, you'll be receiving these invites for all of our global initiatives in terms of webinars and even the newsletters and things like that. You can also follow BIMobject on LinkedIn. We post those out there usually within LinkedIn. Next Wednesday, August 14th, the BIMscript team is going to be presenting Learn How to Become an Accredited BIMscript Content Developer. That's a standing monthly webinar that we have, so join in. The links are up for that to register. And then August 21st, it'll be another BIMobject Talks with Steve Holzer, and hopefully Matthew is going to join me on that one. But I say you tell us, and the reason is there's a survey that's going to pop up as we end here, and one of the things, the survey is very short. It's really, number one, would you recommend this to somebody else, and just to let us know how well we're delivering, but also what else do you want to know about? And the reason I'm not setting these up, many times after a talk, I get a lot of this very similar questions out of these surveys from you folks. That want me to move, deeper or further with specific things that came up. So while I got a whole bucket, if you will, of topics that we could talk on, I usually like to wait and see what comes in with the surveys, and then we set that up because it is 2 weeks out, and then you'll see that when you get the invite next week. So Matthew, thank you so much for joining.
Thank you.
Adding to, I appreciate your help a lot. And thank you all for taking some time to educate yourselves and help us learn on how we can help you. That's really important. So we'll continue to have the dialogue going with BIMobject Talks and Webinar Wednesdays. They're pretty much every Wednesday, and we'll hopefully see you on the next one. Have a fantastic day. Again, the recording will be available within a couple of days, and you'll receive an email. Anything you have to close out, Matthew?
No, I've had one really complicated question in, which I'm gonna type the response to. Just guys, have a great rest of the week. Please go and visit bimobject.com if you've not already. Sign up as a user and give us some feedback and tell us maybe what information that we're missing.
Yep, great.
Thank you very much.
Have a great week. Cheers, everybody. Bye.
Cheers, everybody. Bye.